I have a lesson that deals with this question. What do I need to know about heaven? You know, I was thinking back. I can remember, and I even looked back at some of the old outlines that I had. I used to preach a lot of lessons about heaven and trying to explain heaven to people. As I've gotten older, I realized that's a pretty futile thing to try to do. That's something that presents a great deal of difficulty because of my lack of experience in that area. I was kind of thinking about something I've said many times. The most impressive place that I've ever been in my life, bar none, would be Yellowstone National Park. I mean, from a physical place, I think it's the most impressive place that I've ever seen. When we came back from out there, we had videotape of some of the things, and we also had pictures, and I've seen documentaries on television. But I can tell you right now that until you actually go there and experience some of the things that you see, you really have no concept of them. They're really beyond kind of realizing until you actually see it. I mean, seeing a picture on television of mud bubbling up out of the ground is a whole lot different than being there and feeling the air that comes off of it at 180 degrees. I can tell you quickly. It's a lot of difference. And it's kind of that way with a lot of things. There are a lot of things that if we try to explain them to people, they're very difficult to explain. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever noticed or seen the commercial on television. I think it has to do with the Shriners Hospital. But they're asking a bunch of kids to give a definition of love. And it's interesting to hear the definitions they give. And love is something that's very difficult to explain. You can look at the explanation that God gives in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and it really touches that, but you're dealing with something that to a great degree is an emotion. Emotions are felt, and they're not explained. So it's kind of a difficult thing when we begin to talk about heaven. You know, when I began to look at this, the reason I did is because of the fact that Pat had read me something on Facebook, or actually, I don't know if it was on Facebook or just on the internet, but it was something that actually I think came from some Catholic organization. But it kind of got me to thinking about this, and I'll give you an explanation of exactly what that story is about a little bit further down the line. But for the present time, let's just talk about this. Sometimes our faith needs some maturity. In other words, when we start thinking about heaven, we need to realize that when we look at heaven, and a lot of other subjects that we might study from a scriptural perspective, we have to realize, like the apostles. You know, the apostles realized that human beings must depend on their master. I mean, we have to have trust and confidence in our master. And we can't try to make everything harmonize by human reason. It just doesn't work that way. I want to look to a passage that you've read many times, at least portions of it, in Luke 17. And I want to look at verse 1 through 10, and I want to look at the response of the apostles and the answer that Jesus gave. Then said he unto the disciples, It is impossible but that offenses will come, but woe unto him through whom they come. Now, it's interesting to think about this. I would suppose that you either have been in Nashville and seen the billboard, or you have seen a picture on television of the billboard that's printed or published or supported and sponsored by the American Society of Atheists. And the sign usually says something to this effect, that if there is a God, why is there so much evil in the world? Now, that is the biggest argument that those who are atheistic in their thinking have in opposition to God. It is the thing that is pushed upon you as a Christian to answer. Well, let's try to answer that from a human perspective. That's been attempted, by the way. That has been attempted. If you go back to the book of Job, Job and his three friends all tried to answer that question from human logic. to try to deal with all the evil that's in the world and all the bad things and all the suffering and all the disease and all the premature deaths and all the things that you see. And all Job and his three friends tried to deal with that from a human perspective. And you remember at the end of that, God spoke to Job, didn't speak to the rest of them. I guess He expected Job to tell the rest of them. He spoke to Job and said, "Who is this that seeketh wisdom without counsel, without knowledge?" I mean, that's the problem. Now, if you look at what He says, Jesus said this: "It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, that is, a person who causes others to sin, and he cast into the sea, than that he should offend one of these little ones. Take heed to yourselves." And then he starts with this point. Now, He gives you one thing, and that has to do with, well, why does evil exist, is the question that man has. And Jesus kind of dealt with that a little, kind of introduced it. Didn't answer it, but He kind of introduced it. And then He introduces another question. You know, if a person is an evolutionist, they would by necessity believe in what is sometimes described as the law of the jungle, or the survival of the fittest. Which would mean that if I'm stronger than you, I can do whatever I please, and you're going to do what I tell you. That's what the survival of the fittest, and that's what the law of the jungle is. From an evolutionary viewpoint, you have no moral values, so consequently, the strongest person is going to get what they want. But here's what Jesus said. He said, "Take heed to yourselves. If thy brother transgress against thee, rebuke him. And if he repent, forgive him. And if he trespass against thee 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day turn again to thee, saying, I repent, thou shalt forgive him." It's at that point that the apostles, after hearing these two ideas presented, that is, about evil in the world being such a reality, and the idea that you're going to have to forgive people who trespass against you. You can't go out and beat him over the head with a baseball bat. And so the apostles said unto the Lord, "Increase our faith." And you can see from that answer that they're basically looking at that and they're a little puzzled. And they're saying, you know, I don't quite get this. I believe that God is powerful enough to remove all evil from the world and all unpleasantness. I believe that I should have the ability to seek revenge on those who sin against me. So they say, "Lord, increase our faith." Well, then the Lord says this to them. He said, if you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, in other words, if you have confidence in your master, you might say unto the sycamore tree, "Be thou plucked up by the root, and be thou planted in the sea," and it should obey thee. And which of you, having a servant plowing or feeding cattle, will say unto him by and by, when he has come in from the field, "Go and sit down to meat"? And will not rather say unto him, "Make ready wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself and serve me, till I have eaten and drunken, and afterward thou shalt eat and drink"? Doth he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I trow not. So likewise ye, when you shall have done all these things which are commanded you, say, "We are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do." Now stop and think. All of this has to do with the contrast between God and man, which we've talked about many times. And in effect, this is a passage that introduces something that we know but really can't explain in many instances. I mean, if somebody asked me, explain evil in the world, well, I could say, well, Adam sinned. Well, yeah, but does God love man? If He did, He wouldn't allow this to exist. Well, I can't deal with that. I'm sorry. That's not something that I have the capability of dealing with. Somebody may say, well, you know, if a person doing to others, you'd have them doing to me. But what if they mistreat me? Then I have to, well, yeah. Well, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't really understand that. And then someone says, when you look at the relationship of servants and masters, I don't really understand why one rules over the other. But he says this. He says in the final analysis, what you're going to have to realize is this. We're just unprofitable servants. We really don't know all the things, but we at the same time have to understand that our Master does. And that's the point that's made. So let's think about this a little bit. You know, a lot of people try to deal with heaven in the same way. They try to deal with heaven from a human perspective and try to, preachers often preach lessons and they try to appeal to you as a human being and have and say, you know, hear all these things, and heaven is such a pleasant place. But here's the problem. Here's the problem. The Apostle Paul, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, in talking to the people there, made a statement. Most people think he's talking about himself. May have been, may not have been. I don't know the answer. But here's what he did say. He introduced it, and the reason people sometimes think he's talking about himself, said, "It is not expedient for me to doubtless to glory. I will come to visions, revelations of the Lord." In other words, I've received a lot of them. I don't know if he's talking about himself or not, but here's what he did say. "I knew a man," whether it was him or not, I don't know the answer to that one, "in Christ above 14 years ago. Whether in the body, I cannot tell, or whether out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the third heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth." Now there's the key that you really need to pay attention to. And then here's what he said. "How that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter." Well, the word lawful may puzzle you. The marginal reading says that in the original language, the word lawful doesn't mean what you would normally think it to mean. It actually means which it is not possible for a man to utter. Now stop and think about that. Do you believe that anybody can give you an accurate description of heaven? Well, Paul said even if you were dealing with a person who had been there, that he wasn't going to be able to do that because it's unspeakable and it's not possible. Why? If you're gathering information, what do you use to gather the information? Just think about it. Use your sight. Yeah. Use your hearing. Yeah. You can smell it. Yeah. You can feel it. Yeah. When we get beyond those senses that we have, just for example, if I were a witness in a trial and the lawyer or the prosecutor asked me questions and I answered the questions, and then I get through and I said, "But you know what? I don't feel that that's what really happened." What does the judge care what I feel? He doesn't care what I feel. He cares about what I felt, what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled. Those are the things he deals with. He's not going to deal with the things that I feel. And I think that's really what Paul is getting at here. If you're trying to give information to a person who has no concept of what you're describing, of what use would the information be? You know, if you were married to a man, as a lady who had been born blind, had never seen anything in his life, you would never say, "Well, I really like a red car, don't you?" Because he doesn't know. And you have the same problem when you have a person who's trying to explain heaven who's been there. It's not explicable with the five senses. It's just not. And so consequently, you're in a position of having to realize that as a mature Christian, if you're trying to get somebody to describe heaven good enough to make it where you want to be there, that's not really the big issue. You know, God does give us a figurative description of heaven. But any person who's ever read it, and we may read this pretty quickly. I don't know that we'll spend a lot of time with it, but I do think it's important to read it. Because I want you to notice what he talks about there. he said he was carried away in spirit to a great and high mountain. He showed me a great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Now I want you to answer me a question. You ever been to a big city? Probably so. You've been at least to Nashville, Birmingham. Maybe larger ones. But here's the problem with larger city. If you're on the ground looking at it, it's still like you can't see the forest for the trees. Nashville and New York City look pretty much alike from the ground. You have to be above to see how large one is and how small the other is. Still looks big. But you go to a big city. Can you imagine that literally that God is lowering a big city out of the sky? I mean, he's giving you an illustration. He's talking about a vision that he saw to impress a point on it. It had the glory of God. Their light was like the stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, which is crystal. Well, you think about glory of God and light from a stone, and really, stones don't exude light, but they have that appearance when light hits it. He's giving you a description so that you, with your five senses, can kind of appreciate something grand. He had a wall, great and high. It had 12 gates. And at the gates, 12 angels. And names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. On the east, 3 gates, and then 3 gates on every side. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations. And this is an important point, by the way, thinking about it from the standpoint of a figure of speech. The wall of the city is left out of heaven, which is representative of heaven itself. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Who revealed the gospel of Christ to us? The apostles. What is the wall that separates those who are in heaven and those who are not? The gospel. And obedience to it. He that talketh with me had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. But, you know, if you're thinking about a city that doesn't have any time, then I guess measurements wouldn't be too great either, but they're said for our benefit, so we can understand them. And the gates thereof, and the wall thereof, and the city lieth 4 square. So it's exactly the same width and length, and every side you go down is exactly the same length. 12,000 furlongs. And he measured the wall 144 cubits according to the measure of a man. That's interesting to notice what he said there, according to the measure of a man, that is of the angel. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold. And this is really one of the most interesting things, like unto glass, clear glass. You've seen gold, and he's talking about purity. Foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper. I can't pronounce all of them. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls in verse 21. Every several gate was 1 pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, and it was transparent as glass. I saw no temple there. The Lord God Almighty and the Lamb were the temple of it. The city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. And the kings of earth do bring their glory and honor it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day. But the thing is, there's no night there, so they never shall be shut. And they will bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it, and there shall be in it there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth. Think about that statement to the apostles and people saying today, how can the God that loves us allow any evil thing to be there? Well, he said when he gets us to heaven, we won't have it. Neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie, but that which is written in the Lamb's book of life. Then he showed me a pure river of water, of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the sea of it, and on the other side of the river, was the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded a fruit every month. And the leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. But remember, they had no sickness, so the healing was a permanent thing. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it, and its servants shall serve him. That really is the key to why we want to be there. All these other things that are talked about, I mean, if you look at the Taj Mahal, it's pretty impressive. I don't really want to live there. But why do I want to be in heaven? Is it all the 12 pearls and the 12 manner of precious stones and the wall so high and so thick and so long? Or isn't the reason that I want to be there expressed in this passage? The throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their forehead, and there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun. For the Lord God will giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. So he's telling you, heaven is a glorious place. But let me ask you something. In light of what the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, do you believe that this is a literal translation, description, that you're going to expect to see a large pearl that's the gate, and that's going to be the literal thing, and that's what it's got to be? Or is he actually talking with you and trying to make you understand this is a glorious place? But if I can't really describe it to you because you're a human being and you haven't been there. Human beings don't go there. Now think about this. There's an enormous difference between fleshly bodies and spiritual bodies. There's really no comparison between them. So, you think about the fleshly body that you have, the limitations it has, the things it experiences. And you think about the spiritual body, and it won't be like that at all. So also as the resurrection of the dead is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. Let me ask you a question. Can you imagine that you would never even have a passing thought in your mind that you're going to die? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a time that you never even have a passing thought that you're going to die? I mean, whether we like to admit it or not. I mean, when you go down the road and somebody crosses the center line and you pull off to the side and you're shaking up and you're sitting there shaking, why are you shaking? Because you knew you about died. That's why. Just think of the things that you do and don't do because you're afraid you might die. But this passage says that's the way you are in this corrupt state that you're in, this physical body. But when you're raised, you'll be raised in incorruption. There'll be no more thoughts about dying. There'll be no more concerns about whatever medication you can make sure you take so that you won't die before night. You won't worry about a car coming down the road and hitting you when you happen to be standing a little too close to the side of the road. Those kind of things won't exist. There's no fear of death. Remember, in this same passage, he says the last enemy to be destroyed is death. He says, so also the resurrection of the dead is sown in corruption, is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, is raised in power. And then he makes this very clear. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, and there's a spiritual body. I've about become convinced that if somebody asked me to give an accurate description of heaven, that I would positively not be able to do it because I'm a human being and the things to describe it are unspeakable words, impossible to speak from even a person who's been there, and I haven't. So let's think a little. What do I need to know about it? Well, if I trust Jesus Christ, I trust Him, then the only thing I really need to know is He's there. That's it. You know, have you ever thought about, we think about children having a hard time in transitioning from one place to a new place. You know that's really not true. Now, if you're talking about very small children, I don't know, at some point they begin to be more aware of their surroundings. But if you're talking about small children, you're too old, you move from one house to another, they could care less. You know what they really do care, though? Their mom and daddy's there. They don't really care about anything else. That's the only thing that's important to them. The only thing, you ever notice that you're around the house and the kids may be a little miserable, but the mom and daddy walks in the room, they suddenly light up? Well, why? The room didn't change. Nothing else changed. The only thing that changed was they were in the presence of the one that in their mind is their supreme person that they trust. So the only thing I need to know about heaven really is that Jesus is there. Let's think about this. In John 14, and this is a very familiar reading, and you've read it many, many, many times, but just think about it from this standpoint. Jesus is talking to the apostles, and he said, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. Don't let your heart be troubled now. Don't be all discouraged and despondent. Because you believe in God. Now let me tell you what that means. If you believe in God and therefore you trust me, because I am God's Son, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself. And where I am, there ye may be also. Now you stop and think about that. What's he telling you? What do you perceive a mansion to be? What do you perceive a mansion to be? Everybody have a different thought on that. I suspect that your perception of a mansion and a person living in Guatemala would be quite different. In fact, they'd probably look at your house and say, man, that's a mansion. Your perception of a mansion and one of the world's most richest men like Bill Gates, his perception of a mansion probably a lot different than your perception. Jesus is not so much trying to impress you with the idea of how great it is, but what he is trying to impress you with is this. I will be there. So why do you want to go? Isn't the primary reason you want to go to heaven is because God and His Son are there and you trust them? You ever noticed that if you're in a place that you kind of feel is a little bit iffy, and you're sitting in the car in the parking lot, maybe of a convenience store in a place that has a very bad name, and you're kind of a little upset, and a police car pulls in beside you, do you have a different feeling? Why? Just because the police car is there. That's it. No other reason. Nothing else has changed. Being in the presence of God is important. You know, Thomas said something to Jesus that's interesting. He said, we know not whither thou goest, and how can we know the way? So Thomas still was trying to deal with this from the human perspective, saying, Lord, you're leaving. We don't know how to get there. And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Now think about this. The reason I want to go to heaven is because I want to be with my Master. The Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 1, and this is a passage you may have read before. There's something in it that I really had never noticed before. Never really thought of it in this way. Notice what he said. According to my earnest expectation. Now think about that. Earnest. What's the word earnest mean? You ever bought a piece of property? Did you pay some earnest money? You know earnest money is not part of the down payment. You realize that. If the deal falls through, you don't get the money back. It's a good faith deposit is what it really is. And what does it say? It says, I am serious about this. I'm not just a passerby. I'm serious. I'm going to buy this place. Paul talked about his earnest expectation. In other words, I am serious about this. This is not just something that we say, just sing a few words of a song, but this is something that's a serious thing with me. And my hope. And then his hope was that in nothing I should be ashamed. What does that mean? I believe I'm going to receive it. I'm not going to go back on it. He goes on to say this, but that with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be life or by death. And then he enters into this discussion about the value of life and the value of death. Here's what he said. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live in the flesh, this is the hope of my labor, yet what I shall choose I want not. And you know, people would look at that and say, well, you know what? Heaven is such a wonderful place, and God is there, and Jesus is there. then really, I don't really care about anything else. I'm going to go there. I want to go there now. I guess that'd be a good reason for suicide in some people's minds. With Jim Jones and Guyana, that was pretty much the truth. Well, let me ask you a question. Suppose that you have a lot of folks dependent on you. That's what Paul's talking about. He's saying, the fact is, if I die, that's not really something that's a big negative to me, but it would be a negative to you. When you look at someone who loses a mate, the one that's left behind is the one that suffers, not the one who left. If you look at someone who loses their parent, especially for small children, everybody's all upset because you don't know exactly what they're going to do. I mean, this is a serious, serious situation. I mean, that's what Paul's saying. He's saying, everybody's always asking this question. Everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. Well, truly speaking, that's so. Because there are all kinds of relationships that we have and duties, responsibilities that we have in this life. And we're responsible for them. So Paul said, I must straight between the two, having desired to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. Important distinction there. Let me tell you something. When I start thinking about why I want to go to heaven, I've kind of gotten to where I don't preach a lot of lessons anymore trying to describe heaven. What I do preach lessons about is that God seeks your best interest. Let me ask you a question. When you go to a doctor, but particularly if a child went to a parent who loves them, devoted to them, do parents always do things for children that children like and that they appreciate at that time? Read Hebrews 12 and it'll tell you what I'm talking about. Just think about it. No. But why does a child, especially an older one, I used to tell people this when I was an older person, I was 21 years old, and I told somebody one day, I said, I'm going to tell you something. If my daddy decided to give me a whipping, then he would give me a whipping. And that'd be the end of the story. Did I have the capability of resisting? Maybe, not sure. But I could give it a try. But the fact is, I valued our relationship and I trusted Him. And I trust Jesus a great deal more than any human being who ever lived. In chapter 10 of the book of John, John talks about the shepherd relationship that he has with you and I as Christians. In verse 27. My sheep hear my voice and I know them and they follow me. Why? Because they know me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. They trust me because nobody can take that away from them. My Father, which giveth them me, is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Think about it for a moment. Is there anything that I can give you that couldn't be taken away from you? I don't know. Not physically, I don't think. I don't think I could. Even if I'm a doctor and I give you your life, one day you're going to lose it. So I don't think there's anything I can give you that cannot be taken away from you. But I have the confidence that Jesus can give me something that nobody can have any effect on whatsoever. And I think that's what's critical. That's what's important. I know that for many years here, every time we had, and I mention it occasionally, every time we had a training night on last Wednesday night of the month, Brother B.D. was still living and still capable. He would generally read, and I don't know if it always were true, but in the last several years of his life, he read one passage every time. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For Thou art with me, and Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Can God describe exactly what that will feel like? I'm not a spiritual being. I'm not there. But do I trust that what He told me in Revelation chapter 21 and 22 describes something that I can trust Him will be everything and more than He said that it was? You know, sometimes when people, you say this, it's like people think you're underselling the product. Like you're trying to say, okay, God's going to give you heaven. It won't be as great as you think. No, the problem is it will be much greater than you think because you don't have the capability of understanding the greatness of it. So here's really the point. I don't really need to know anymore about heaven. I really don't. What I need to know is that my Master will be there. And my Master has made promises to me and to you, if you're obedient to the truth, that it'll be a grand place. And it's worth everything, even the giving up of your life in order to accomplish it. My Master will be there. You know, you think about that, you realize how important that is. I sometimes listen to real estate ads and they talk about selling homes. You know, real estate companies don't sell homes. They don't have any capability of selling people a home. They can sell you a house, but you're the one that's home. You think about your home and you think about what you value in it. How many pieces of furniture would be in your house that were there when you were a child? In my home, probably none. What amount of difference does that make? I mean, it's not the physical things that make a home. It's the fact that we're spiritual beings and we have relationships with each other. That's what makes a home. And that spiritual relationship with God is the most valuable of all. And we need to stop and think about that. So grow up in our faith. Why do you want to go to heaven? Well, primarily because God's going to be there. And I long to be with Him throughout eternity. Never obeyed the gospel is something you need to think about. Why would you obey the gospel? Because you desire to one day be a sheep that Jesus knows by name and invites you into an eternal place that's beyond description. Something to think about as together we stand as we sing.